folks. Welcome to another edition of the Omnis Hour. Turn this down a bit. Okay, today I'm going to tackle a subject that I've touched on a few times, but never covered in one fell swoop. And because there's so many things, so many facets to it, and it's so pertinently related to what's going on today, it's really hard to do it justice. I've toyed with the idea of writing a whole separate book on the subject, um, trying to capture it all that way. And frankly, the information needs to get out, and I don't think anybody's going to read a book anymore. Um, this is some pretty heavy stuff, and folks who want to know need to know it. The title of today's talk is A Brief History of Hive Mind Species. Okay, so let's back up and talk about what is a hive mind species. Okay, well, we see hive mind species in the insect world. We see bees and ants who organize around the preservation of a queen. And the queen sits in the middle of the hive, being serviced by all of the other bees who are specialized to be either workers, drones, potential sex mates for the queen or the queen's successor, or the worker bees, which are the females that didn't make the grade to get to reproduce. That's generally how hive species organize. They're, in every case that I know of, ruled by queens. They are sexual species. They have a very interesting way of reproducing. Now, it's interesting that in nature, these only occur in insects. I don't know of any hive-minded. Actually, I take that back. Insects and plants. Many people aren't aware that some species of plants operate as essentially a hive mind. They don't realize that because most people don't realize plants actually think and have some level of consciousness. But we'll get into that shortly. At any rate, that's what a hive mind species is. It's a species that basically organizes around serving a central figure or figures who, through whatever messaging system, give out orders to the rest that must be obeyed to serve the greater good. This is why ants will attack another ant hive and kill mercilessly, die without any regret to do the queen's bidding and conquer the enemies. This is a very popular psychology for some schools of military thought, some schools of governmental thought. And we're going to be getting into all that soon. This is going to be a very interesting discussion, let me tell you. Okay, so that's what a hive mind species is. Now, we have other kinds of hive mind species that you may not have thought of yet. But I'll get your brain a turning on before we delve back and start talking history. Think about the AI argument we're having today. About, is AI dangerous? Is it good? Is it going to conquer us? Is it going to be our servant? Well, one of the pieces of that puzzle that's not as often discussed is what kind of AI? How is it organized? Is it organized as individual, independent units of consciousness? Or is it organized as a hive mind, where each artificial intelligence is restricted to operate within the framework set by one supreme AI? And yes, there are corporations working along both models. Most of them along the supreme AI model arguing that that's going to make it more easy to control if all I have to worry about is controlling this central AI that has the kill switch for all the others. I bet if you work in the AI field or you studied it, you have probably thought about that problem. Okay, so let's back up and talk about the history of hive minds. And here I'm going to probably blow some minds. I'm probably going to get called a nutbag conspiracy theorist. I don't give a shit. I'm going to fill in some of the gaps in the creation story that you won't find in the Bible, in the Sumerian tablets, in the Vedas, in any recorded human tradition or oral human tradition. And I'll tell you exactly why you won't find it, where a lot of this information is hidden. Okay, so let's back up to my earlier discussion of how creation started. How did physical universes begin? If you'll remember, the explanation I tell you, which is consistent with what scientists are finding now, is that the Big Bang was actually the birth of two universes, a universe and an anti-universe. That's why this universe only manifests primarily positive matter, protons and electrons, and there seems to be a great dearth of antimatter in this universe. Where's the antimatter? It's in the anti-universe. Makes a lot of sense. It actually is perfectly consistent with the most fundamental laws of physics of equal and opposite reaction, which is also the fundamental law of karma. Karma is very much like physics. If you want to hear more about that, you can go back and listen to my segment on the physics of karma. Okay, so creation all began with this universe pair. As I contest, and you can prove to yourself, everything in the physical universe is represented, is a manifestation of a soul. The universe has an oversoul, which is essentially the god of that universe. Now, this initial universe pair was oversouled by two souls, one that was a volunteer from God's team, we now know as the male demiurge or Lucifer, that championed creation based upon free will, free choice, and a sense of responsibility, karma, which was in its infancy then. In its infancy, it was pretty much an honor system. You either played by God's rules if you wanted, or you played by the anti-God's rules, who provided the volunteer, quote, or the other universe, the anti-universe, the female demiurge. And no, this is not derogatory towards females. Sex didn't exist at that time. Sex was created after, and we'll talk about that today, exactly when sex was created and how it's related to hive minds. Okay, so this was the first phase of creation. Now, in the beginning, these two universes represented essentially a test tube, a petri dish, for experiments in God's team ideas and Borg's team ideas. But because both teams agreed that we don't know who's right, one team's ideas might be better than the others, and the right solution for something might be something in between. These universes were made parallel. Now, how were they made parallel? They were essentially made parallel by the first sub-creation happening within those universes was apportioning Basically, envision the yin-yang symbol. One half of it representing, of each universe, representing the experiments in that universe aligned with God's team, and the other aligned with Borg's team. The authoritarians versus the freedom fighters. And those basic divisions exist at the highest level, at the macro level of the universe, which give the universe the structure it has of galaxies. And as experiments became more refined, extended itself to galaxies even. And our galaxy in the Milky Way is a very special galaxy. It's a galaxy that contains the direct descendant of the top level experiment between God and Borg. And this galaxy, the Milky Way, contains two very special star systems. One is our star system, Sol, God's favorite test tube, and the other on the opposite side of the Milky Way is Borg's favorite experimental ground. Now, why does that happen? Because if you kept having the only connection point, the only transfer of data, there's my wife trying to avoid being on camera. If the only connection point has to go universe to universe, that is a factor that slows things down. And that was maybe necessary early on when we were creating things like the early elements, stars, galaxies, star systems, etc., planets. Probably good to have a little separation there and have those two ideas of creation not meet until the ideas were fairly matured on either side. And then you're ready to have, to battle it out and see whether God's planets, God's galaxies are better than Borg's planets and galaxies, and you start throwing them at each other, which is essentially how the kids played in that era. I'm telling you that souls have not been that smart throughout history. Even God started out as a really dumb, zero-level soul. All did. That's what experience is for. That's what karma is for. It's a better system for giving you experience, teaching you how to be a responsible creator before you're given the keys to your own universe. Okay, so what's been going on has been this battle playing out in smaller and smaller test tubes. And in fact, the first hive mind species was the first secret weapon, if you will, of the Borg side. Okay, a hive mind, think about it, is an entity made up of units of consciousness who have no free will, who have no ability to act outside the directives they've been given by some higher consciousness. That's what a hive mind is all about. And those can be very effective. We can see in nature how successful ant and bee species have been. They can also be incredibly brittle, as anybody who knows anything about the bee collapse problem is aware of. They're very highly specialized hive minds and very sensitive to major environmental changes. That's why they react so violently to any threat to their hive. And that in itself is one of their weaknesses, that they are incredibly violent species when they feel threatened, far more so than almost any other kind of animal. Okay, So, what I'm telling you is that the oldest hive mind species, the oldest non-hive mind species, were actually the first AIs. Before DNA was ever created, before we figured out this system of using life to create new soul vehicles were created by basically just mashing molecules and atoms together. Essentially what we do in fabs today with semiconductors, only in that era, the gods had enough power that they could just do it. Imagine being able to make a chip, a whole structure that performed a certain function and allowed you to basically be its driver. That's what we got to after folks' souls stopped finding interesting things to do, creating at the macro level or the micro level. They started finding interesting ways to create new soul vehicles out of combinations of molecules, combinations of elements, finding new properties for elements, exactly what science, human science, is doing right now. And we're still finding things every day. Wow, I didn't know if you did, if you used rubidium in this way, and, use a magnetic field in this way, that you could generate this set of conditions that produces this new state of matter that we never knew about before. Okay? We are rediscovering a lot of what has already been discovered by the gods. That's why it's there to discover. And we're also finding things that they never found because they were not cautious in their experiments. When you can do anything just with the power of thought, you find something that works and you just put it in production. And this is the danger of unlimited consciousness. This is the reason why we have reincarnation and karma, because souls before the physical universe was created were dangerous. They had ideas that were very, very destructive to each other. Not physically destructive, because there was no physical bodies then, but mentally destructive. And anybody who has dealt with mental abuse, with abuse by a narcissistic person, abuse by a narcissistic CEO, abuse by a narcissistic party, a narcissistic religion, knows exactly that those kinds of abuse are far worse than physical abuse. The abuse of the soul is what really hurts. Killing the soul is the worst kind of abuse you can do, and that's why I give Buddhists such a hard time, because their whole religion's built around killing souls. Ego death. Sorry, I don't like what you preach, and I'm going to preach against it every chance I get, because you guys are dangerous. You are, like it or not, tools of hive-minded thinking. Okay, so what I'm here to tell you is that the first mobile, sort of humanoid or androidish creatures had two varieties. One variety, which was crafted right here on this solar system and operated as individual consciousnesses with free will and very loose government by the souls that controlled them, because at that time reincarnation and karma were much simpler. There was no forgetting. There was no limit to how long you could play this game. And you could actually come and play for a while and then bring in a stand-in to take your place for a while, and tell your buddies to keep an eye on your stand-in, because you were going to go play in heaven for a while. That's how it used to work before reincarnation amnesia and before term limits on how long you could occupy a soul vehicle. And these androids essentially lived forever. If you read the Asimov series, the Foundation series, and the Robot series, you hear about the robot R. Daniel Oliva, and read all of the books in the full both series that tie everything together, you will find that this robot is in fact one of these first AIs that existed before humanity and has been basically guiding all of humanity's actions and everything ever since. Asimov was not a religious man per se, but ultimately, towards the end of his life, his last books, he took a very religious bent on this thing and posited that actually we were created by a benevolent AI, which one might say could be a god. Well, that's not God. He didn't quite get consciousness. He didn't understand that the material world was not everything. Obviously, he didn't, or he wouldn't have spent all his life chasing after awards and writing books and going to conferences and letting people, oh, Isaac Asimov, you are God to me. He wouldn't have been into the whole worship thing, right? That's how you tell if somebody is not, even if they're a Messiah soul, have some ideas that are going to be very influential. They're not a very high level soul spiritually. Now, Asimov heaven, I'm sure he's cursing me and cussing me as he's listening to me now. Sorry, you may be a god now, but you're not the god. I hope you realize that. And you had a lot of good ideas, but you didn't quite get the big picture. Now I'm sure you do, and I'm not dissing your work, and you can write more science fiction novels till the cows come home and sell them wherever you want in the multiverse, even through ghostwriters among the species now. There are many people who have been inspired to write in the vein of Asimov. So this is how, essentially, Asimov, though he has passed on, uses his now God status for what he's contributed to still influence the world. And there's probably some authors that get direct influence from him, not just from reading, from actually spiritual inspiration. Carry, and this is essentially how God works too. So, at any rate, that's how it all started. Now, that takes us up to the point where these androids were fighting. There was another group of androids that was hive-minded, run from the Borg planet, and they had a distinct disadvantage in that they had to operate, they had to go try to conquer the non-Borg part of the Milky Way using the diminishing power of their hive mind. They could only control so much, so well from their home planet. And they had to develop the idea of having essentially multiple queens that were essentially clones of the original Borg on the Borg planet. And those clones tended to be fairly independent-minded. And in fact, before they could conquer the independent side of the galaxy, those more independent Borg worlds started becoming very independent and started playing both sides and acting more like a mixture of the freedom loving side and the authoritarian side, creating hybrid governments that could attract souls of both kinds without actually assimilating the freedom loving souls. They could coerce them into cooperation through threats of physical violence, through mind control techniques, through propaganda. And this was essentially what is a familiar theme of battle that has been going along a long time. Okay, this layer of battle really reached another stalemate, as they so often do, where, get my notes back up, neither the board side nor the God side could gain much ground, and the Milky Way was pretty much evenly divided. Two main powers and many minor powers that, kind of formed the buffer zone between them. Okay, so what happens when a stalemate happens? You kind of go into a stasis where you're waiting for the next big idea. What's the next big idea? An easier way to create soul vehicles than putting together elements. Okay, because to assemble those elements, you've got to talk a bunch of souls into inhabiting the pieces of it. And you can't make anything very big without a lot of buy-in. And that gave Borg an advantage, yes, but it also was a big disadvantage, because who's going to want to spend eternity under the thumb of an authoritarian micromanaging God, even if it is one that has a lot more experience and can teach you a few things? So the next step of the puzzle was to create new life forms that were sort of self-evolving, that you didn't need to attract souls beforehand to craft them. You didn't need to pull in the spiritual energy of many souls to make this golem or elemental. Yes, there were creatures like that. Those are based in real things that did happen. There are still some of those kind of soul vehicles around in the universe. And there's very specific places where they thrive. Inside stars, inside planets. This system of self-replicating physical things is why DNA was created. Now let me explain that further. So DNA is a code for building things. And that code has a soul, but the code for a human being is essentially the soul of the whole human race, because the human genome is one thing. And what it becomes depends on how it combines with another differently organized piece of DNA, but same number of chromosomes and everything, to make a unique individual. And until that unique individual is defined, that entity does not attract an oversoul. And this ties into the segment I did recently on abortion, where my thoughts on abortion come from, and why I think it's probably okay to let women choose to have abortions within the first trimester. Because at that point, the human fetus has not developed enough to attract a soul. All the major organs need to be fully formed There needs to be a sense of what identity, what body I'm taking on before a soul gets stuck to this fetus. Yeah, so basically you've got a kind of life where you can develop vehicles for souls and let the souls choose to inhabit them. At least the oversouls, which are the higher souls, the more experienced ones in the game. Now you still have the lower level souls that make up the organs and the individual cells and everything that don't have a lot of choice. They're more like elementary particles. They don't get a lot of choices, but it gives them some experience with this higher level organization that will hopefully lead to them getting an opportunity to have more free will, more choice in future incarnations. Okay, so this is essentially one of the things that's come out of this conflict. That is a combination of both Borg authoritarian ideas and the free will ideas of the God side. And absolutely every soul goes through a training period where they have less free will, less awareness. And the first step of that is the level 0 soul, the virtual soul that essentially has no free will but is constrained to operate along the parameters set by the universe or the microcosm that it's part of. So a virtual soul that is in a human, is representing a human today, acts just like the original human, but is constrained to operate in a way that is consistent with the original, except when that conflicts with a higher level experiment, and ultimately won't conflict with the wishes, the plan of the God whose universe they're occupying. And this is how the divine plan works. It doesn't work through force. It doesn't work through coercion. It doesn't work because God's almighty, all-powerful. It works because God has earned his own universe just like everybody else, and invites other souls to participate in it to the extent that they do it according to the rules of God's universe. And Borg's universe works Borg's way. You've got to be willing to commit to work within those rules. And other new gods that have been raised since then have their own rules in their own universes and are basing their universes off different versions of karma. It's their choice, it's their universe. But nobody's forced to play in their universe. Okay. So, now we've got DNA. Now, the first DNA species were trees. And in fact, there were intelligent trees in this solar system. The ants did exist. Actually, they were not big, huge, mobile trees like in Lord of the Rings. No, the intelligent trees were intelligent, independent plants were far smarter than that. They're the ones that invented insects to serve them, to bring them their food, to fertilize them once they learned that sex was kind of fun. Okay? Those are the members of the plant kingdom that were created by God's team. Now, there are members of the plant kingdom that were created by Borg's team. In fact, the spores that are behind the whole idea of panspermia, which you may be familiar with as a term, were a Borg idea. Borg thought, oh, okay, I can find a quicker way to invade new planets with hive minds by sending hive-minded spores to conquer planets. And yes, there has been an endless war between some kinds of plants and mushrooms, fungus, that still goes on today. You can see it in action as the fungus tries to outcompete the other species, and does quite successfully in some conditions, especially very hostile environments. Okay, so this goes back a long time. Then came insects. When the board saw how successful insects were, they said, well, we just need to make hive-minded versions of these insects. But by then, sex had been created. How did sex get created? Well, I'll tell you. This whole scheme went on a long, long time. Battling between species this, species that, without any sex. Sex was invented actually fairly late in the process, when essentially the Milky Way was being populated. It was the primary species there were not plants, but were intelligent species of all sorts of different varieties: plants, animals, insects, etc., etc., etc. Some of them hive-minded, some of them not. Some of them Borg-oriented, some of them not. Now, at this time, one of the wars, major boundary wars going on, was between two species that we call the Lyrans and the Syrians. Now, if you know anything about the Lyrans, you know that they were a feline species that came from a star cluster that was famous for developing communication through music. A very individualistic way of communicating. So very much a God creation. Borg's music is not very pleasant to have to hear day in and day out. As you know, if you listening to pop music these days and were raised on something that had less of a Borg flavor to it. Our pop music today has been Borgized. It's been dumbed down to a lowest common denominator. Beat, 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 simple melody, simple song, words always the same, bullshit level, which is going to feed in later in this discussion. So I'm just going to get your brain going a little bit on that. Okay, so these Lyrans, this cat species, had no sex. They were developed from basically the alpha predators of a particular world that eventually developed enough intelligence to be among the starfaring species. Became useful actually as warriors and minstrels. You could call them the original bard character in Dungeons and Dragons, fighting warriors. The other species, the Syrians, Sirius is the dog star. The dog species was originally sexless, and they were a hive-minded species. This is still evident in the fact that they're pack-oriented. They work in packs, and they have a definite hierarchy that there's the alpha animal, and the alpha animal decides everything. They get the best choice of the kill, etc., etc. This is a characteristic that has its roots in Borg authoritarianism. Cats' natural tendency, now this isn't universal because species have intermixed so long, but the cat's natural tendency is to be much more solitary, much more independent individual, and less fixed on a definite hierarchy. Yes, prides of lions do work along hierarchical lines, and there is a leader, so that's not universally true. Thank you. Just got my herbal fix for the day from Aska, one of my nephews. They're great kids, I tell you. I love having not only my own child, but having two almost like older siblings, the two nephews that live with us. Okay, so these species were having a major war, and they were essentially the focal point of this great battle between the Borg side and the God side. And everybody was watching them and trying to, who's going to win this one, because maybe the winner of this one is going to finally break the stalemate. And somewhere along the line, somebody had the bright idea of suggesting, you know what, let's settle this in a different way, a new way. Okay, let's take these two species and let's genetically modify them so they can only reproduce with each other. And one will become the females and one will become the males, two different sexes, and their product will be either more female or more male, more Borg, more freedom-oriented, more authoritarian-oriented. Maybe, just maybe, this might be the path towards a solution of this endless conflict that we've got going in the galaxy. That's what they did. Both of the species signed up to it, and they went to their inoculation centers, I guess you would call them, to get the virus of sex. And to make it all fair, some of them got the female virus and some of them got the male virus. So from then on, they found that they could only reproduce by finding the right opposite of the other species and mating. And made for some interesting times, let me tell you. Didn't actually work in the long run. In fact, the war got worse after that. And finally, both species ended up getting wiped out. And it was kind of looked at as, boy, that was a really unsuccessful experiment. But like most things work out, the idea actually had the kernel of something really useful. And so even though those species both died out, at least in terms of the intelligent spacefaring versions of them, the idea of sex was kept as, you know what, let's not let intelligent species have sex, but it could be a use to control lower species. And in fact, it could be a very useful way to mix species, to crossbreed them, to specialize them for different tasks, and manipulate DNA in a way that not all of the god species knew how to do, because only the inventors of DNA really knew how to splice it together like that, how to make DNA into whatever they wanted. The ones who invented the code knew all the combinations that were encoded in it. So this was viewed by the whole galaxy as a way of, like, we don't know who the original creators are, but whoever put this DNA shit together is going to now have some competition from us that know how to mix through species interbreeding and intermixing. And that became the next big thing, and split up the Milky Way into teams of even more variety. There were now reptilian teams who had the extra specialty they developed of knowing how to make things that change sex. It's an interesting adaptation that they discovered. All sorts of different species that were adapted to quickly fitting into new planetary environments, and without so much terraforming, which had to be done before, so the dominant species could make the best of wherever they were at least the species that were not inorganic, which were still around, but had some distinct disadvantages versus organic species. Okay, so basically, this all leads up to where we're at today. Now, the history of this system is long and tortuous. A lot of it is captured in the Sumerian tablets about how this solar system was formed, how the Earth got here as sort of a second generation planet after whatever planet was there before the asteroid belt was created. And yes, those Sumerian stories were quite an accurate rendition of what happened. They lost a bit in terms of what was going on creatively in the time. There is a certain sense of it in the original creation myth of the Sumerian tradition was basically of two waters, a male water and a female water, the pure water and the bitter water. And it wasn't really clear which was which, but this actually maps pretty closely to the idea of the male and female demiurge, the universe anti-universe, the Borg side, the God side. All of creation ties pretty well to that. So it's if you were going to do a one-line simplification of all of creation before human history started on Earth, that would be a fairly good approximation. Now, the other thing that you will find in mythology is the idea of therianthropy, of half-human, half-beast creatures. And this is absolutely real. This is how God-level species intermixed with lower-level species to produce close to God-level species, ones that were more intelligent, less beast-like than the ones that were there, that were more pliant and useful as slaves, yes, as servants, yes, as stand-ins for the god species on planets that, you know what, we don't want to send a party to this place yet because it hasn't been terraformed enough for us to be happy there. Let's do some quick modifications on what is living there and let them do the terraforming. And, in a couple million years, we'll send a party out and we'll have some of the basics of life that we expect before we do a full colonization. And the Earth went through all of those phases. It was formed fairly late in the game, after a lot of this stuff was happening. The event that destroyed that other planet in the system, that other planet was where life began. It's where these original AI cyborgs began. This solar system has been used by God's team for a long time and has been thought to be destroyed and written off the maps of enemy strongholds many times, as the Borg side thought they won, but has always been recolonized. And in each colonization, new ideas, new DNA, new characteristics of the fundamental laws of souls have been introduced. And this is how the law of karma has gone from being a very loose honor system where souls could say, well, I'm going to go play game as a Scorpion Man today. I think I'm going to go be the Scorpion King of planet X15 and get all my minions to conquer the planet. Fine. That was the kind of silly, childish game, fantasy game, that the old gods liked to play. And we still have many recordings of that in all spiritual traditions. The Vedas, the Bible, if you use the original translation of the Old Testament, the Sumerian texts, etc. These were very childish, very infantile gods. They're not here anymore because a new karma is here. Now, I want to tell you about some of these therianthropes you may not be aware of. Now, because it ties in the ages of man, there's a reason that the zodiac is the way it is. These ages correspond to infusions of new blood, if you will, into the human equation, into the chosen species, the development, the evolution of a chosen species. And different signs of the zodiac actually map to therianthrope species that were active. Now, a lot gets said about the age of Taurus, the age of Aries, the age of Leo, the age of Pisces, the age of Aquarius. Sagittarius doesn't get talked about too much. Why? Sagittarius, the centaur. Religion has been wiped out. A lot of history has been wiped out relating to that era. Another era that has a lot of amnesia around it is the era of Scorpio. Now, those of you who know about the phyla of species know that scorpions, are arachnids. They are actually part of the spider family, 8-legged insects. Many people aren't aware of that, but in fact, the scorpion people were one of these groups that was very, very powerful at one time on this planet, and still had some descendants active as late as the early dynastic time of Egypt. That's why you have the Scorpion King. There's actually two Scorpion Kings. And eventually that bloodline was wiped out. And the Scorpion goddess of Egypt fell into disrespect, completely ignored. I mean, how many of you have heard of the goddess Serket? Probably none of you. This was the Scorpion goddess. Now, she's generally depicted in later art not as half human, half scorpion, but as human with a scorpion on her head. But in fact, there are some older pieces of art, Egyptian art, which actually show her in her therianthrope form, as with the body of a scorpion and the head of a human being. And you can imagine that these were pretty powerful creatures. And I am here to tell you that these were a Borg species. These were hive-minded, ruled by queens, Borg species. They were the ones that created this mythology around this magic golden age when women ruled everything and everything was so perfect because women would keep the peace, women would do this, women would do that. You know, they were the creators of the feminist myth that is becoming so much more active today. And they were essentially the queens of a hive mind species of spiders. That's interesting. If you look at spiders today, you'll find that there's not a single hive-minded species of spider. They've all been wiped out. It's also interesting to note that the social life of spiders is interestingly very feminist in nature. Typical spider life cycle goes like this. The female, which is usually larger than the male, selects a mate, mates with the mate, and then kills the mate, wraps the mate up in a spider web with all the eggs that are produced, and then guards this egg sac until the new spiders are born. And when the new spiders are born, they start by eating daddy. And when daddy's all gone, they go on to eat each other. And the few that survive this gestation period, if you will, gastronomical gestation period, are the ones that come out and become adult spiders. Very few live to tell this tale. And this makes spiders effectively one of the most disliked and feared species because of some of these behaviors. Spiders are incredibly ruthless with their prey. They have absolutely no sympathy. They will attack mercilessly when challenged. And they're one of the species most likely to have a venomous bite. Okay, which is also kind of a Borg characteristic, to react to encounters with others that aren't going your way with, I'm going to kill you, is an authoritarian sort of behavior, isn't it? If you don't play things my way, I'm going to kill you. This is a Borg trait. That can be a very successful trait for a predator. It can be a very successful trait for a mother creature defending their young. It's actually a trait that's more common in the female of species. Yes. In most dangerous species, the female is actually more dangerous than the male. Interesting side note. Okay, so how does that relate to today, Rob? Well, what I'm telling you is that one of the ways that hive mind species form since the advent of sex, and why did sex be allowed to exist? Why is it still being used as a system if it's got so many problems? Well, it's an ideal way for a species to explore this dichotomy between the Borg thinking and God thinking, authoritarianism and freedom. Think about it. All of our fundamental issues that are sex are really about control and freedom. My body, my choice. You're married to me. I got your ring. You have to be faithful to me. It's a loss of freedom. That's a commitment to giving up freedom. And that's a big problem for many people. Now, it's interesting to see where this is going since the advent of mass marketing, commercial advertising, and mass propaganda. In the last 100 years, the development of first radio, then TV, then the internet, and social media follows a progression of making it very, very easy to affect minds. If you can get your content in front of somebody else, you can affect their mind. If they see enough of it, if they're told black is white enough times, they'll start believing it. If they're told that cool is hot, good is bad, these are all stages that we've gone through. Those of you who are old enough to remember when, good used to mean good. And then there was a stage where no, good is kind of square. You got to be bad to be good, to be popular, to be part of the in crowd. There was a time where good meant adhering to the Judeo-Christian ideal of honor your parents. Don't commit murder, don't do this, don't do that. We talked about the 10 Commandments a few sessions ago. And that's clearly gone by the wayside. And some of it rightly so, because as we discussed in that segment, the 10 Commandments are a little bit fuzzy and don't necessarily make much sense in many cases of what are very complex moral issues. Okay, but how does this all tie in with hive-mindedness? Okay, one of the first ways that commercial advertising and propaganda started working upon this species is noticing that the female responded to a very, very clear set of messages. Now, what kind of messages are those, you ask me? Those even existed before. Look at the stories, the play that was popular for females before commercial advertising. They would play dress up. They would pretend they were a princess. They would pretend that they were the mother of a family and the leader of a family, the one who decided the whole game. And that's why, boys never wanted to play tea party with their sisters, never wanted to let their sisters dress them up. that wasn't what the boys wanted to play. They wanted to go play cowboys and Indians and rough and tumble games and stuff like that, competitive games. Okay? Women also are very, very receptive to messages of peace, harmony, oneness. It's much easier to get a group of females to think of themselves as a collective, than it is for a group of males to do so. It takes a long time for males to bond to the point where they consider each other a collective. That's why sports teams tend not to be successful until they've been together and develop sort of a culture of togetherness, which is usually based on more upon the male idea of wanting to be the leaders in competition, and only by joining together as individuals can you beat the other team. If you look at how females organize, well, yeah, they do have some competitions, but in general, the cheerleading squad is much less oriented around the chief cheerleader. There is one, but she's kind of looked at in a catty sort of way by the others as, like, they tend to be much more hive-minded in their thinking, much more easily moved into hive-minded thinking. This is why absolutely most of advertising these days is targeted at women, and most particularly young women, because this is the easiest market to conquer. All you've got to do is get the young females talking about it on Instagram, TikTok, whatever, and you've got an instant fan base, an instant volunteer marketing team, and everybody wants your product for a while. Very fickle too, but they can be very loyal to long-term psychological manipulation. And if you look at the political programming that is increasingly becoming part of commercial programming, it's always been part of it. It's just that, back in the old days of Hollywood, the political programming was pretty much in line with what was good for the U.S. And I mean, the early days of the movie industry, the TV industry, were the times of the Great Depression and World War II. And there was a very strong sense of unity in the United States, and a strong sense that what was going on in the United States, government-wise, was a much better model than what was shaking up in Europe, either under fascism or communism. And there was a sense that, well, maybe the U.S. is starting to become a little bit imperialistic, but we're not nearly as bad as the English, or the French, or the Dutch, or the Spanish were. And many people at that time were very, very much in favor of a laissez-faire foreign policy. Let's not get involved in that. That's not our business. In fact, there were so many people of that mindset that Franklin Delano Roosevelt had to maneuver the Japanese into attacking Pearl Harbor so that the U.S. could be drug into World War II. Now, whether that was a good or bad thing, I'm not going to comment. The way it came out, I think, was the way it had to be, and there was a lot of good that came from that. But at any rate, having observed closely how the mind of bits of humanity have been manipulated over the last 100 years, I can tell you that there's a definite trend in the propaganda. And that trend of political propaganda is being driven by hive-minded thinkers. Now, what are the two characteristics of hive minds? Hive minds have a absolute leader, a queen bee, queen ant, or a queen set, an oligarchy, a group of people who believe that they have the right to dictate to everyone else what is right because they're the beautiful people, which is essentially how most of the media behaves today. The other piece of it is that they don't like to be questioned. So their narrative goes, or people get silenced, get squashed, get suppressed, get accused of things they didn't do, gaslighting, false flagging, you name it. All of these tactics will be used by a hive mind that feels threatened. And so let me tell you that both international communism and international globalism are hive mind movements. And they are absolutely have their biggest support and fan base. Hey, McCow. I'm going to be done soon, dude. They have their support base in the female population of the world. The female population that thinks, oh, if only we could just be nice to each other. If only we had harmony and peace and love and oneness, then there would be no problems in the world, and we would be living in the Wizard of Oz-land with Dorothy. These are dangerous, dangerous people. These are people that are actively manipulating, morphing the mind of humanity into a hive mind species. And this is how humanity will turn out if we don't stop this process. Over the space of many generations, it will only be these beautiful people elites that are able to reproduce, that are able to perpetuate their genes, who will choose only a few partners to allow into their elite set to euthanize the genome. They're already doing it. This started in Nazi Germany, the eugenics programs of Nazi Germany, and continued unstopped and is currently active behind the Great Firewall in China. This is one of the reasons that there is such a tight bond between communist China and the globalist elite in the rest of the world. This is why they partnered with China to develop the COVID virus and to develop their global vaccine strategy, which is absolutely all about programming of humanity to suit an elite model. By pretending that they are giving you the latest vaccine each year, so they're going to keep you safe from from all the new bugs that are coming. Oh, you've got to be safe from all the new variants of COVID. You've got to be safe from all the new flus. You've got to be blah, 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 blah. And they are going to selectively breed humanity out of existence or into the state of essentially a slave species. They're dumbing down through the media, through pop culture, which is absolutely banal, stupid culture, telling you that up is down, in is out, anybody's truth is right. This has all happened in the last 100 years. Nobody knows anything anymore. Anybody can go online and spout any kind of bullshit, and if they've got a big enough following, oh, all of a sudden it becomes mainstream. And you tell me that the New Age spiritual community isn't absolutely full of assholes like that. And the one commonality is this peace, love, oneness bullshit. Because that's what the elite want. That feeds right into their agenda. That feeds right into their vision of a hive mind future for humanity. This is the latest battle of this big, big history of battles between Borg and God. And I don't know who's going to win the physical side of this battle. I only know who wins the spiritual side of it. I have a hope that humanity is going to pull its head out of its ass and get to become the God species that some of it deserves to be. Not the assholes who think they're going to program humanity. They're going to make a perfect man, the Ubermensch of the elite. These are Borg servants. They're not bringing anything good to humanity. They're going to destroy it if they're given a chance. But I have hopes. I know there's a lot of folks on the God side that may not even realize it yet. They just know that they don't like to be pushed around. And you're seeing them appear all over the place now as the agenda of the global elite becomes more obvious. The World Economic Forum, you will be happy. You will own nothing and you will be happy. Klaus Schwab, you're a Borg agent. Absolutely. Bill Gates, you're a Borg agent. Mark Zuckerberg, you are absolutely a Borg agent. Or a dumbass who got honeypotted into supporting China, which the jury's kind of out on that. I think Zuckerberg's more of a dumbass, don't you? At any rate, this is some really serious shit going on, and that's why I felt like doing this segment. I hope that you have a clearer understanding of the battle going on and a clearer understanding of the history of it, and can maybe link that into your worldview, no matter what religious background you have, no matter what country you come from, no matter what your belief system is, as long as you believe that you're a sovereign human being, that you deserve to make your own decisions, not have somebody tell you what to think, when to think, how to think it. You're gonna have no, okay, papaya right now. And that's a better world than the alternative. Because the peace of the grave is no peace. And that is the peace you have in a Borg Orwellian utopia. It's exactly what's happening in China right now, where people are seeing all the insane stuff they're doing with the COVID lockdowns. Banks running out of money, and anybody that speaks up is conveniently disappeared or beat up, or both. That's exactly what's coming to a world near you if you don't wise up. That's exactly what Trudeau was doing to the truckers who didn't like the COVID idiocy, having to show vaccine passports every time they cross the border, even though they would do it on a regular basis going back and forth between the US and Canada. That's exactly what's going on with the farmers in the Netherlands, who are seeing insane globalist policies forcing them to basically not be able to farm anymore. They can't afford to run their farms. That's happening all over the world. These folks are trying to dictate at a very high level things that they have no understanding of, processes that are very complex, doing things that have horrible side effects that they cannot possibly know or predict, and they don't give a fuck because they're flying around in their Learjets, going to the Davos conference and hobnobbing with the beautiful people. They don't give a flying fuck about humanity. Never did. All of the bullshit that these people are spouting is empty virtue signaling. This is all the noise that's coming from the fake left today. I call it fake left because it is fake left. It is establishment left. It is communist, globalist left. That is not liberal. That is not progressive. There's nothing the least bit liberal or progressive about the Democratic Party, about the establishment Republican Party, or their equivalents in any other country. And there's certainly nothing at all democratic about a uniparty, which is what they have in China under the Communist Party. A bunch of mafia thugs who run the entire country. And, you know, it runs exactly like a bunch of mafia families that all look up to the big godfather at the top and who would knock him off at any moment if they could and replace him. And that's why there have probably been many attempts on Xi's life that we don't even know about. Because everybody wants to take him out and be the next godfather. That's how mafia families work. That's how bored hive mind organizations work. Everybody wants to be the top queen. It's not peace and harmony. It's the exact opposite. The reality of what you get in a system like that. So let's just not go there, okay, folks? All right, I've got to go spend some time with my family. They're getting very, very impatient to have me. I hope you enjoyed this segment. Like, share, subscribe, and come again to the Omnist Hour. Until next time, Rob Trump.